Marcia Week Show, and we're coming to you live from Barbados. Well, good morning, everyone. This is the Marcia Week Show, and I am Marcia Weeks, and we're coming to you live from Barbados. All right, this is the Christmas period, Christmas season, so we want to say Merry Christmas to everybody. I can see people are logged on already. Listen, y'all waiting on the show. People are logged on already. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Of course, I always want to know where you are logging on from. Yeah, which country are you logging on from? Say good morning, please. I'm saying good morning to you, so I want you to say good morning to me as well. And very, very important, I'm going to ask you to share. I need you to share. I need you to share. So good morning to those who are watching. And please let me know where you are watching from and share. It's Christmas time. So we're cleaning the house and some people are out shopping, and I know might have to watch it a little later. But those of you who are inside cleaning the home and, moving about, I'm going to ask you to share and let somebody else know that we're on, right? Very, very important that we do that. Now, I have some announcements for you. I am so excited this morning to announce to you that Miss Valerie Suzette John Marie. Miss Valerie, Monica Hoyt. Hi, Monica. Yes, welcome from the beautiful country of Barbados. Yes, it's really beautiful, lovely, and very sunny today. And we are so happy to be alive. Almost the end of the year, we're still here. We're still here, and we're excited. We're excited. Christmas is coming up, and we are happy to announce that Miss Valerie Suzette John Marie is home. She's home, and we are so excited about that. Last Saturday, I said on this program, I had put in the comment section of the program that it is my hope that she'll be out before Christmas. And today is the 18th of December, and I am so thrilled to tell you that she's home. I spoke to her this morning, and she's given us a statement, and we are so happy. So, Miss John Marie, Valerie, if you're listening, we are so thrilled that you're home with your family. You're home with your family, and we are so thrilled. And she says here, I've been through an ordeal emotionally and otherwise, which has taught me a lot about life, fraternal associations, and justice, or the lack of it. We all found ourselves in a place where we need to take a closer look at ethics and truth with a critical eye. I want to send my love to all the people worldwide who have sent me letters, kept me in their prayers, and have rendered their support in so many ways. Thank you all. I entered prison as a fighter, and I have left as a fighter. I am aware that I'm in a David and Goliath situation, and that ultimately God is in control, for He is a leading attorney and the judge amongst judges. This message is sent with love and without malice. Love is timeless, and her signatures, her signature piece there at the end, those XXX. Anytime you see that, you know that's Valerie, a wonderful woman, and I'm just so happy. I'm thrilled. When I heard this morning, I laughed out so loud. I was so excited, and really happy for her that she is out out of prison, and she's home with her family. And I really hope that there is justice, in this case. And that's what we're going to actually be talking about this morning. Good morning, Joelle. Good morning, Joelle. Joelle, you doing the Christmas cleaning? Oh, wow. Good to see you, Joelle. Please share and let people know we're on. Yes. So again, Miss Valerie Suzette John Marie, she is out of prison and she's home with her family. And we are so happy about that. And we use this platform to let the world know of what was happening to Miss Valerie here in Barbados. And we are also happy to announce that she is home. Valerie is home, and we are very, very happy about that. We also want to, before we start the show officially, to deal with the topic at hand this morning, I want to send our support to all the nurses in Barbados, all nurses, both those who are vaccinated and those who are vaccine free. We want to send our love and support to all of these nurses, because if we remember, since 2 years ago, they have been in the trenches. These are the ones that we were sending out our love to. We were, at a certain time of the night, we were sending applause to them. And we were doing a lot of things on social media for nurses, not just in Barbados, but throughout the world. But especially our nurses in Barbados who've been on the front line. Yeah, the medical fraternity who've been on the front line, and we want to affirm their right to choose what goes into their bodies. And so this morning we stand in support of all the nurses. I'm sure that if you've been following what's happening in Barbados, that you would know that the nurses, that there is a strike going on. And I'm seeing in the papers this morning, this is the Barbados Today, that the nurses are standing firm as strike action continues to threaten the national vaccine program. And I think what these nurses are saying is that, you know what, it's my right to choose what I put in my body. And they have been successfully treating people and taking care of people at the hospital, and we want to affirm them that it's their right to choose. Of course, the Prime Minister is saying that the nurses, if they strike, that their pay would be docked. But we want to stand in support of the nurses. We understand what your positioning is, right? We find that is it's important at this time. Yes. Very, very important. It's Christmas, and it is very disappointing to know that they would have to lose money from their pay after they have worked so hard in the year. But we just send our support to them this morning. Yes. Oh, good. Glad to see those who are on. And if you're just joining me, Valerie Suzette John Marie is out of jail, out of prison. She's home with her family. And, we advocated for that on this program. So I'm very, very, very happy to know that is what is happening at this time. Now, on a Saturday especially, I love to start. Okay, hi, Steve Moore. Good to see you. Hi, Steve. Good to see you. We're going to have a great program today, Steve. Very educational. And the program that we're doing today is all about justice. And you will understand why. And, it's really, really all about justice. And the scripture verse is Amos 5, verse 24, which says, "But let justice roll down as waters, and righteousness as a mighty stream." And this is what I'm speaking in Barbados at this time. Let justice roll down as waters, and righteousness, yes, as a mighty stream. Today's program, we are talking about the the major concerns that we have about the Barbados Debt Settlement Arrears Act of 2021 in a COVID-19 context. And you might be, some of you, if you don't understand what what this is all about, you're trying to figure what does this have to do with justice. Well, you're going to see as the program goes on, because for me it's important, that we have a basis for what we're doing, what we're involved in. And this particular topic for me is very, very important, because of the element that I see in there of injustice. And as I said, the scriptures, let justice roll down as waters and righteousness as a mighty stream. And anybody who knows anything about me, when there is any form of injustice, I can't keep quiet, right? I can't keep quiet. I have to open my mouth. Now, the Debt Settlement Arrears Act of 2021, what this bill is saying is that it would enable the government of Barbados to settle its obligations due to certain persons and make provisions for the creation and issuance of Series J bonds to those persons. Let me read that once again. This bill will enable the government of Barbados to settle its obligations due to certain persons and make provision for the creation and issuance of Series J bonds to those persons. The objective of this program today, titled Major Concerns of Barbados Debt Settlement Act 2021 in a COVID-19 context, is intended to share with Barbadians, especially laypersons, unfamiliar with the details of government papers such as bonds, treasury notes, etc. And it is our intention to deal with some of the issues surrounding this particular act. We will explain what it is. What is this act? We will explore the challenges that it poses to Barbadians who are owed money by the government, and examine the ways in which the provisions of the act may create problems for the average Barbadian. And we have with us this morning Miss Maxine McLean, who is no stranger to us, and we just want to welcome her. Great to see you again.
Thank you for having me.
I was telling her off the air how I love those glasses. I'm so in love with them. Beautiful. Well,
the bigger they are, the better to see.
I didn't hear that.
Thank you. I said the bigger the glasses, the better I can see, baby.
Well, welcome. It's a real pleasure to have you to talk about this. This is a very, very serious issue here. And we're talking about these, we hear the term government paper. Can you explain in simple terms what this is?
Okay, government paper really relates to debt owed by the government. Government borrows money from citizens, that's the individual citizens like yourself and myself, from institutional investors or buyers, which would be companies, pension funds, and so on. And the notion of paper is that they borrow it in the form of bonds, let's say a 5-year bond, treasury notes, or treasury bills. And these are really, you used to be issued with a certificate. So you actually literally had a piece of paper which said that you had bonds equal valued at whatever the case may be. So it is really talking about a method of government borrowing. And in this case, from the on the domestic market, we can focus on that. So in terms of government paper, that predominantly, that's what we're looking at. And this is what this particular bill talks about. You're talking about government debt instruments, the method that they use to borrow money, and the way it is done. And as I said, traditionally what you had was a bond certificate, and so if you bought, let's say, $1,000 in bonds, you may get a single certificate indicating that you'd purchased $1,000 in bonds. You may get a treasury note, which was an actual physical document. They've now moved away to issuing rather than several, because if you bought $10,000 in bonds, you may have 10 certificates or more. A single, as we move into the digital age, the issue with a certificate rather than individual.
Ah.
So you get a piece of paper which says you have invested in this, but the notion of government paper is that it is the means of recognizing, documenting what you borrowed. So it's really about government debt, money borrowed in the form of those particular instruments, bonds, treasury notes, treasury bills, etc.
Okay.
A bond has a 5-year life. I'm sorry, go ahead.
So the concern that I believe that citizens are having is that they didn't borrow money. Some of these people didn't borrow money. This is just some of it is sort of services that they performed. Is that what the concern is? That they did
Okay.
not choose to go into this kind of relationship?
Okay, let me explain. Because this is a Series J, which means that over years and years, people will have been buying bonds. Now, in the case of this piece of legislation, and if you go back to what you read, and I think I have it scribbled here, I'll repeat it. The bill would enable the government of Barbados to settle its obligations due to certain persons and make provisions for the creation and issuance of Series J bonds. And they specify exactly who they will use this. So in essence, let me specify and then I'll explain the difference between the traditional bond. So they're saying under this act, government can use these Series J bonds to pay any outstanding liabilities prior to September 30th, 2018 for land acquired. So let me elaborate on that a bit more. You hear of compulsory acquisition of land, and I like to use my own situation. My father died in 2003.
Yes.
And before he died, on more, at least 3 occasions, parts of his property would have been taken up by government at the front to do work on Black Rock Main Road. They were extending the road, so they took off some of the land. At the back, on the Free Hill side, they would have taken off some of the land. And basically what I can tell you, because once we had this discussion of this program, I said, let me check with my siblings. Our recollection is that he has never been paid for that land in that compulsory acquisition. So one of the things that you would find that if you went into the Ministry of Housing or the Ministry of Finance and they gave you a sum of money that government owes for land acquired, it is going to run into hundreds of millions of dollars. And that is because payments for all acquisitions have never been completed. And this is something that has spread over decades and it has spread over multiple governments. So it's one of the things that you've got a very large outstanding debt for land acquired. And so they're saying that if land was acquired before September 30th, 2018, this is one mechanism by which government can settle that debt. In addition, there's a second category, and it talks about obligations of the Crown in respect of cases or legal claims. So you had an industrial accident at work in a government office. Something else happened. Government was sued, and there was a settlement the government owes for whatever the nature of the legal claim. Again, prior to September 30th, 2018, they say they can settle it with these bonds. And then there was another clause where they said essentially, it can almost translate Barbadians, what it says, denominated arrears. And I must tell you that there was an amendment to this legislation, so you can actually see what was said. But it basically, having looked at those two broad categories and the third element, what they're really saying to you is that prior to that time period, is September 30th, 2018, they can settle any debts. Now, that Series J bond, so the first question is, if, and they said any other debts, and this is what people really had persons very concerned, particularly public servants. Now, you're given a bond, but there are special characteristics of this bond. And I don't want to get too technical, but I'll highlight the main one as somebody who was invested in paper over decades. It is not bearing any interest. So in essence, if for example, right now, I am holding government bonds, and when I bought those bonds, they were carrying approximately 5% interest. And I will come back. We can probably look at the boss bonds that were issued to public last year, which carry an interest. So these ones, as it says, these series J bonds carry no interest. And there's another provision. It will be paid to you. It's a 3.5-year bond, 42 months. And so in essence, you hold this, as far as I understand, and if I am wrong, somebody would have to come and correct me. You receive these bonds, and I'll use my father's estate because my father's dead. If my father's estate, if the amount owed to my father is settled by the issuance of some of these bonds, we will have to hold them for the 42 months before we get cash. That is my understanding. From the bond issuer, which basically would be the Central Bank of Barbados, who would issue on behalf of government. Now, I'm holding it for 42 months, bearing in mind that under traditional arrangements, interest would have accrued to debts outstanding. So if you are saying that I would have been entitled to interest if you owed me money over several years, but you are now replacing that figure, because let's say that it was $1,000 when it started, and by the time the interest accrued, it is $1,500. If you are giving me a bond, are you going to give me for the $1,500, or are you going to give me for the principal? We would have to get into those. But whatever they give me, having to hold it for 42 months and not earning any interest on that is really hard. And frankly, from the perspective of the person owed the money, it is unfair. I call it unfair. Now, the government may put their reasons for not paying interest, but for me, it is something that creates major hardship. And I say that because, and I focus on the element beyond the settlement of land acquisition debts. I focus on the other provision of the legislation, which talks about, it says, the issuance of those bonds and it says for legal claims before September 2018. For me, that was an umbrella provision. And that is what really started a lot of the discussion in the public domain. That is what caused persons like yourself to raise this with me and other people, asking, what does this mean for me? And basically, the concern is that if you say other provisions, and that's a fairly, what I would call broad-based, generic kind of provision, which means that if the government owed me money for whatever reason, and I would go back to what happened in 2018-19 when government did a restructuring of domestic debt. At the time government did that restructuring, persons like myself, because as I said, I've been doing this since the 80s, I was holding treasury notes or treasury, and bonds. And government then said, okay, we are in a financial bind and we cannot pay you as would have been the identified terms and conditions when you purchase them. But they are saying to me now, okay, we're going to pay you. And it really created a lot of problems. For example, there's a lady I know at 85, a pensioner, when she received her gratuity, she invested the money substantially in government paper because it is traditionally and around the world, government paper is seen as a safe investment. It is as it's conservative. People say it's conservative, but they liked it because you knew you were going to get back your money.
Right.
In the case of Barbados, until this happened. So persons get anxious. Now, my question is, since I am owed money in the form of bonds, and I would have to check and see what series, there were about 3 different times I'd purchased before 2018. Can the government now turn around and say, you see, I'm not gonna, you no longer can get cash for that. You may fall under this series J. So the question really and truly is, tell us what happens, because I remember, and I took time to listen to the debate in the Senate, because I had this interestingly escaped a lot of us. in Parliament, in the House, when it was first debated. When it was debated in the Senate, and I think in reading now the newspaper coverage, there were concerns by the unions representing public servants, who wondered whether or not on retirement persons who would normally get a gratuity, a lump sum of cash, whether
Mm-hmm.
they would now find themselves being given bonds, um, and in either part or full settlement of that gratuity. Now, there's a concern that flows from that for me, because with the recent domestic debt restructuring and the impact that that had on individuals and credit unions, for example, um, the the government has now found itself in a situation where people are uncomfortable with the notion of investing in government paper, in government bonds, or if they were to float any, and so on. So what you have a situation where there will probably be a reluctance on the part of individuals to purchase bonds. So some people see this as a means of, while it is addressing the government's cash flow situation, etc., some people see this as creating an option that they would prefer not to have. Let me put it that way.
Right.
Because uncertainty about what happens, given what happened in 2 years ago or so, approximately.
Right. Well, Bernard Pula, welcome, Bernard, from Barbados. He has a question here. If these debts have been outstanding for years without being paid, how will the government be able to settle these bonds in 3 years? And I'm hearing that kind of thing on social media. People want to know. These are some of the questions. I don't know if you want to. Um,
Well, I can only say it is a question that has to be posed, because um, if you were unable to do that, let's say the figure was 300 million and you couldn't do that, how do you do it in 3 years? So that, for me, I can't answer. That is a
mhm,
function of government revenues and that kind of thing. But it is an important question to ask, because, in
mhm,
other words, at the end of the 3.5 years, the 42 months, what will happen? No,
mhm,
so that's a very interesting and important question that needs to be
mhm,
answered, because the debt essentially will be there, and it would have been, the form of it would have been changed, in the sense that have a bond. The expectation also is, but even if I were to sell mine to a commercial bank or whatever, or somebody else, the debt still is owed to somebody. So I think that's a
right.
question that you can put out there for a response from the officials who are part of the structuring of this arrangement.
Mhm. The question I want to ask is what has changed? Given there's a change of the legislation, and what do you think has prompted this change?
Well,
Because,
okay. No, sorry, go ahead.
yeah, that's a question I want to know. What has changed given this most recent decision by government to amend the legislation? What's happening?
No, I think what it is, it is really a new piece of legislation, because it's called the Barbados Debt Settlement Arrears Act. So they
Mhm,
have created a piece of legislation which allows them, um, to um, which allows them to settle debts in a particular way. What I can say, if you ask about change, for me, what has changed is the whole notion of the holding of a bond. What has when an individual bought bonds some years ago, he or she took a personal decision, or if a company did it, a company put position to
mhm,
invest in government paper. One of the things that we need to do is to ask yourself. In fact, let me put it this way: what they're really okay. So, in the first instance, Barbadians, whether individuals, credit unions, um, pension funds, or whatever, opted as part of their saving or investment strategy to buy government paper to invest in bonds. Those bonds carried an interest rate because it's really a saving strategy or an
Right.
investment strategy. As you know, the interest paid on bonds typically has been higher than interest paid on savings in other financial institutions. In this case, and that was a voluntary decision to do that.
Right. That's the
On the
thing.
other hand, what we have now is a strategy um, crafted by government to settle debts because they are saying we do not have the cash and therefore we will give you government paper. My position on this, and I speak as a pensioner, I speak as a person who has invested in government paper and has been impacted negatively by it, not in one place but two places, because as a credit union member, my credit union, like many other credit unions in Barbados, would have invested in bonds and treasury notes, etc. Coming out of the restructuring, the estimated figure, and I've seen, is about $34 to $35 million would have been lost by credit unions in that particular restructuring. So in essence, I got burnt twice. I got burnt directly because of what I held. And secondly, I would have, because I'm a credit union member, the kind of returns that they expected on the government paper that they held, those returns were reduced by that amount of money. And therefore, if you were to average it out, you can look and see how much each on what per capita, in other words, how much was lost per member in the credit union movement, in any credit union or across the movement in total. So back to the notion of the difference, having explained the the notion of the investment that you normally do versus a forced situation for you, because here, in other words, you have now the option of receiving money for in those situations that we described as spelled out in the act. You are given this. In essence, they're saying we will use this piece of legislation, this creation of these J series bonds, which bear no interest, to settle those debts. Now, one way to look at it is, having done that, why may it be a problem? Why may it be a concern for persons who are owed money? If government says, and I go to the, well, even with the injury, let's take a personal injury situation.
Right.
John Brown or Mary Smith either one of them has been injured on the job. They have been waiting to get settlement. The injury might be of such severity that they really cannot work. And they might have been earning at a level that even disability benefits from national insurance do not compare favorably with their salary that they earned prior to the injury. So they may decide, look, okay, I am waiting for this settlement. It would allow me to probably pay off my mortgage so that I don't have to worry about monthly payments for mortgage out of a reduced income, and so on. But then when you give me these bonds now, I'm still in a dilemma. So one of my options might be to go to a financial institution, let's say the bank, and say, can you buy these off of me? Or somebody might have turned to a relative who might have just received a gratuity or a significant bonus or inheritance from a dead relative or whatever the case may be. And they would say, can you buy these so that I can get some cash? Right. Now, my first reaction would be, I don't think so. I just got burnt by government's actions. And therefore, I hesitate. So right. I might sit down and leave my money in the credit union to earn less interest than I would like, but it is earning interest.
Right.
And so on. So the point is that it creates a concern, because the question is how what's the word? I'm trying to find the right word, but how easily can I convert these bonds into cash? And has that situation probably changed? So there are two things that to me, two strikes against them. One is the fact that it bears no interest,
Right.
and
Exactly.
therefore, if I buy it from you, I'm going to have to build an interest. I'm going to give you
Mhm.
at a discounted price. So
Oh.
if the bond is $100, I may say to you, okay, Marcy, I will take it from you, but I can get $80.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So right away you're at a disadvantage. But I have to if it's a commercial or a financial decision on my part, I am going to
Mm-hmm.
have to do something that
Mm-hmm.
will allow me to make it worth my while. But you may be
Right.
desperate. Therefore, because as I said, you had a personal injury in the example that I gave. And
Mm-hmm.
so you may decide, okay, let me take the money. So you kind of
Mm-hmm.
hit twice because you've waited a long time for the settlement. And
Mm-hmm.
as I said, those kinds of outstanding debts have been accumulated over decades.
Mm-hmm.
And so you might have been waiting for settlement for 15 years, for 10 years, for 20 years. You know,
Mm-hmm.
you might be waiting for a piece of land. As I said, in the case of my father died in 2003. That's 18 years ago. Yeah.
Wow.
And the acquisition was before when he was very much alive. So you can add
Mm-hmm.
on some years to that. So in essence, what it really is, and as I said, I am focusing primarily on its impact and on us. Um, and my position is while government will try and will need to find a strategy, do you do something like this that, at the end of the day will really create some stresses. Now, it is for them to explain to the public how this fits into their IMF program and so on. But that's not where I'm going to go. What I
Mm-hmm.
really want people to these are the questions that you're posing are the kinds of things that people have been asking about. So,
Mm-hmm.
you know,
So, but thank you so much for that. As I'm saying, this is so informative, guys, because we're not hearing this kind of explanation and discussion around these changes in legislation. As you said, we happened to hear about them, and this was being discussed, and a lot of us, it just went over our heads. We didn't even realize. And I'm so glad that we have the opportunity now to discuss it, and it just reminds me like everything else that's happening, guys. Alex, I see Alex commenting, Steve Moore, all everybody who's on. It's like everything else that you hear about it, by the way, and there's not discussion and for us to education for us to understand what is really really happening. Now you have beautifully explained how it could affect an individual. Is there any way that it
mhm.
could affect institutions?
But of course, if I'd go back to the bond issues prior to September 30th, 2018.
Mm-hmm.
Um, if institutions have invested in those things and government decides, well, we don't have the cash, we're going to give you another bond in
Mm-hmm.
place of those, it can affect. If we're talking about any debts, let's think of the provision of service to government services. You have people who provide services, maintenance, construction, supplies of products and services. I mean, somebody may be supplying equipment or other supplies to any of the hospitals or polyclinics, to schools. For example, if schools were in session, government provides school meals. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And in preparing those school meals, they source inputs, vegetables, fruits, and so on from various suppliers, I presume.
Mm-hmm.
And so, in essence, you may find yourselves running up some accounts payable to of several categories of persons. And
Yeah.
the government may decide, okay, you know what, John Brown, Mary Smith, I use those two names again. We owe you for the last 9 months. We've been paying you. We have not been. So we're going to settle
Mm-hmm.
this in, and I'm going to be generous in 50% bonds and 50% cash.
Right.
But because you have, as a small business, and anybody who's run a small business will know that oftentimes people are operating on a shoestring budget on cash, very, very tight cash flow situations. And so if I am paid in bonds and I have in turn my employees to pay,
Mm.
my corporate taxes to pay, and I try to avoid penalties, and you give me bonds, my question to government would be, will you take back some of these bonds in settlement of my debt to you? You understand? Because
Mhm.
if I owe corporate tax, if I owe national insurance for my 3 or 4
Yeah,
employees,
good question. That's a good question.
mhm.
Yeah.
So if I owe national insurance, as I say, for my employees or for myself as a self-employed person, and I was relying on a payment from you, but you said to me you have to take these bonds because, frankly, when there was a restructuring and people objected, the government said take us to court. But I can't afford to go if I hold in $10,000 in bonds or $15,000 in bonds or 5,000 or 500. I can't take you to court over that.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
you say, okay, I sign off and accept what, our treasury notes or whatever. I sign off and accept that. So the point I'm making in terms of a small business or even a larger business,
Mhm.
if this is what is happening and you were counting on payments from government, my question in turn, can you meet your statutory obligations, paying your national insurance for self and employees, paying um, land tax on the building that you operate your company from, paying
Mhm.
paying licensing authority for your vehicles that you do business with? Will they take this back from me? So you
Mhm.
see, it is one of the, for me, when I look at these things, because I know people tend to start to scream, you're being partisan or whatever the case may be. But I like to dissect these things and analyze them, because at the end of the day, while um, we often hear the perspective of government, and the accusations and whatever of why they have to do this and we got this and so on. I want also us to understand how it will impact and how it will impact people, who those people will be, and
Mhm.
as a consequence of that impact, how can that impact be tempered where it is having a disproportionate hardship, or where it's creating a disproportionate hardship on certain categories of Barbadians. And these are the kinds of discussions that I think are so critical, Marcia. And I really appreciate that you take the time to try to flesh these things out, because those are the things that we have to really have a handle on and understand the impact, direct and indirect.
This is yeah, very important to me. I mean, this show is called We the People, and so we want to look at that impact of these Series J bonds on regular people, on the average Barbadian. And I'm so glad that you're on and breaking it down so beautifully for us. I have here an article by Mr. Ronnie Yearwood. Dr. Ronnie Yearwood is an educator, lawyer, and social commentator, and it's from the Barbados Today, and he's asking a similar question. He says in the article, many businesses have cash flow problems, and often the government will be a major buyer. So, how does offering bonds help small and medium sized businesses that the government owes money to? You
But
know?
that's precisely that's the very point I'm making, because as you were reading that, I was reflecting on some small operations, and I remember some years ago, maybe about 6 years ago, I was working with one of these non-governmental organizations, which relied a lot on um, grants and philanthropic support, etc. And I
Mhm.
said to the young man, you really need to find some ways in which you can generate ongoing income. Find a way that you can create opportunities for your NGO to um, earn income. And
Mhm.
I literally took him and some of the young men that he worked with to a Barbadian farmer that I know, who was and continues to be very interested in working with young people and transferring knowledge. And I said to him, can you lease some land to these young men and teach them about agriculture? The long and short of it was he did that, and they started to produce fruits and vegetables, which they sold to some of the government institutions, hospitals, whatever the case may be. But then they ran into a problem because they found it difficult to get paid, to get paid on time, right? And so what they realized was that while this was quote unquote a lucrative market for them, in the sense that the volume of orders would have been good for them as a small business,
Yes.
they did not have the cash flow. They could not afford to wait to get paid, because what farming is. You plant your crop, you hope nobody steals it, and so that when you reap something, you would have invested time, money, and so on. So you can't turn around now and wait another X number of months or whatever to get paid. Now think about that. Now, having waited, if they were told at that time, oh dear, sorry, we can't pay you cash, we're going to give you bonds. Now they're up a creek, so they will then have to go and see if they can convert them. That's where I said you have to look at it. Now, I would presume, and I can never speak for government, I would presume that in a situation like this, that government will have some provision to ensure that those kind of hardships don't happen. But
Right.
I can't say, because when we look at some of the things, we would have, but clearly what you're saying is, how would it create problems? That those are two scenarios in which, individuals and organizations, whether commercial or NGOs looking to engage in commercial activity, etc., small businesses can be impacted.
Yes, yes. I did some research, and I remember that we had the BOSS program. Remember that BOSS program where they were, it was an optional thing for those public servants, where they could take bonds for part of their payment, and they would, and cash for part of their payment. And this, from my recollection, it was 5%. That it was given at 5%. Do you know what the uptake was on that?
Actually, there's an article, I think, recently, and it might have been around the debate of this particular piece of legislation. Minister Strawn would have reported, and I think, but let me go back. In fact, what it is, for, because some people may wonder what was this BOSS, the Barbados Optional Savings Scheme. That's where you got the acronym BOSS.
Right.
And I this morning, when you mentioned that this was one of the issues that you felt, I quickly went and looked to see, and I went to the Government Information Service website, and I came across an article in May 29th, 2020. And I'll quote from that article: officials of the Ministry of Finance have been meeting with representatives of the labor unions to discuss proposals to facilitate the government's objective of creating much needed fiscal space, given the projected decline in revenues occasioned by the global pandemic. And that was an arrangement where they said, we cannot, again, is a cash flow issue, and we will have a challenge meeting our salaries obligation, and so we will give public servants a percentage of their salary in bonds. Now, my recollection was there was a whole set of back and forth in terms of what it was. Eventually, they ended up, it was not compulsory, because initially it came across as compulsory. And then they identified, there was discussion, because I remember hearing and following that as well. And then they said they will make it optional. So in essence, you had a scheme where a percentage of the government wage bill would have been paid in bonds.
Right.
And so you had options. And eventually some public officers had options. You opted not to participate. I suppose if you're earning at a level, a certain earnings, a certain salary level, and you really could not afford to save, because at 5% it was a form of a saving in a sense.
Correct. Yes.
Because you're going to get interest, but you may have your cash, your budget may be so tight that your savings, that was not possible. You had an option of holding those bonds until they matured, and the arrangement was that they were going to pay you interest twice a year, similar to other treasury notes where you get interest periodically,
Mm-hmm.
or you could sell them. Now, this applied to, and this is interesting because making me go back to something that I was having a conversation with some friends about this, and I know that this is public servants, persons paid by the public purse. So this includes anybody who's receiving a salary, whether it's the prime minister herself,
Mm-hmm.
members of her cabinet, members of parliament, and so on. And my question is, to what extent did they participate in this? Um, and that would be interesting because, that is where, Marcia, for a second, I can put on my political hat, because
Mm-hmm.
I remember us being asked by the prime minister to take a salary cut, and we did, and it was very clear. Barbadians knew exactly what we were giving up, for how long, and when it was going to be returned, etc. And I remember people being critical when it was returned, as if it was something that wasn't planned. But it would be interesting to know, because while I looked at the information that Minister Strong gave, he said that about $16 million of these bonds
Mm-hmm.
were bought by credit unions. Now, credit unions get burned already. So I get a
Mm-hmm.
little concerned. And then 8.2 were bought by pension scheme. But of course, the credit unions also have to look at getting returns on their money, because they got to pay you and me dividends,
Mm-hmm.
on our savings, etc. So they were taken up. Well, now what that tells me is that if credit unions bought 16 million, those bonds were sold by civil servants. Those bonds were sold by ministers of government if they participated and didn't hold them. Those
Mm-hmm.
bonds would have been sold, I presume, by any of as I said, the people who get paid. I presume it would apply as far as the diplomats who are posted overseas but are paid a salary, etc. So it means that people, to some extent, and I'm not sure, I would have to do the research. I didn't have the time this morning when I realized that this might have, when you signal that you might ask me about this particular issue, to look to see the extent to which, um, what percentage of the salary bill that would convert into, and in terms of actual millions of dollars, so that I can compare the amount that was actually issued versus, and so you can look to see what percentage was held on to by the public officers, what percentage would
Mm-hmm.
have been sold. But basically, in terms of those two numbers, you're looking at, significant amounts being bought by, well, some of it bought by other people, which meant that they were not held on to by the persons to whom they were issued initially.
Hmm. So your question, which is an interesting question, your question is, okay. So the BOSS program, this is something that was presented by the government,
Mhm.
and to help the country. And so it'd be
Mhm.
very interesting to know whether our parliamentarians, whether they took part in this, right? The
Yeah.
ambassadors, all of these people were, did they take part of their salary as bond, as bonds, and got part in cash? It'd be
Mm.
quite interesting to know whether or not that happened. But
Yeah.
as we're talking, I'm thinking about this COVID environment where I listened to you about the impact on individuals, the impact on institutions, inclusive of small businesses. And I mean, when you think of what is happening, what has happened, I've known so many small businesses that have had to close down, etc. I'm concerned about something like this being this piece of legislation being passed in a context, in a COVID-19 context. Well, what are your thoughts about that?
But I think if you look at it, to me, from the point of view of the situation of the country now, the economy as it is,
Mm-hmm.
clearly government anticipates, and because it has been experiencing that, given what's happening globally with the pandemic, that its revenues will fall,
Mm-hmm.
and that then triggers some cash flow issues for them. But similarly, in the context of the citizen now, the people, many people have been out of work, on short time and so on. So there's a general how should I put it? The same negative impact has happened. The cash flows and so on of citizens and businesses have been
Mhm.
equally impacted. And therefore, anything that is going to further pressure put that can put further pressure on that cash flow situation is going to be problematic. So in
Mhm.
essence, when you are talking about um, issuing these to solve government's problem, it is also creating a problem for other entities, whether at the personal level or at the corporate or institutional level.
Mhm.
Now, it is compounded more by the fact that it carries no interest, right?
Right.
In the sense that even if I because if it had an interest component, the ability tradability, the ability to trade these bonds probably would have
Mhm.
been enhanced. But
Yes.
in essence, as I said, you either are going to have to suffer some more if you want to give it, if you want to convert it in cash before the time frame, um, the 42 months, and if because as I said, you're going to have a challenge because somebody might say the only way we'll take this from you is to discount it, and it
Mhm.
may be heavy discounting. So it means then that you're even squeezed some more. You will get some cash, but then it creates a difficulty because you're having to give up a part of that. Even if you hold on to it to then the other, it just really um, makes an already difficult financial situation more difficult, especially for those people who are really stretched in terms of their cash flows, that is domestic, individual in a household or at the business level. And
Yes.
as I said, I understand the rationale from government is that, look, we anticipate these difficulties and this is what we're going to do. But my question is, you know, in the grand scheme of things, how does this impact, and how have other decisions taken by government probably made this situation more challenging, not only for the people but for them as well? You
Yes.
know,
Yes. You
because
know,
sorry, go ahead.
no, no, go ahead. Finish, Miss
No, I was
McLean.
saying, on the one hand, you've heard of very, and I would say, generous provisions to the tourism sector. And I make no apology for saying that because we heard but again, we haven't seen reporting on take up and so on, but we heard of 300 million allocated to a sector and so on.
Which
Exactly
sector
how
is
that
that? 300 million? This was
this was early in the life of the pandemic sometime
correct,
last year.
correct.
We
To the
also
tourism
heard
sector. Yeah.
we also heard of significant tax write-offs for persons of means. And I challenge people to go back and look and see who were some of the early beneficiaries of that. So when you look at those things and then you ask yourself, who's really going to get squeezed by this? It would be interesting to get an analysis of the demographic profiles
Mhm.
of persons who will be affected. Are these elderly people? Are these poor people who, for the most part, might have lost part of their property, their lands through compulsory acquisition? Are
Mhm.
there significant landholders involved in this? So these are the things that we need to, because at the end of the day, government will make its case, and we hear that, but then we have to understand the consequences of the decision, and then you look at that against the decision of other decisions taken, you know, um, in terms of this. So
Mm.
I think it's one of those issues that people need to flesh out, really,
Mhm.
because when we
Mhm.
start to talk about these things and we talk about impact, it will have differential impacts, and some of them may be devastating for some people.
Yes, yes, most definitely. I'm listening to you, and I do remember, the allotment. I'm calling it allotment to the tourism industry, which is an important industry. We're not saying it's not. And I mean, all these different, large businesses as well who have benefited from some kind of, help, whether it is, okay, we're going to buy all the uniform materials, for you because you went ahead and there's no school, and not thinking about the dressmakers and the seamstresses, the small man. And I think that this is another, it seems to me that this is another case of that, where here we go again, the small business people possibly might be the people who are most affected, because they don't have a cushion. Small business people right now, a lot of them have to close their doors. They're closing because of this pandemic. So it's very strange that that would come at this time, when we should be seeking, in my opinion, to help these small businesses, keep their doors open. But this is what is happening at this time. And I'm putting that against the fact that we have, as a country, borrowed, it seemed to me, near $1 billion. As far as from what I'm understanding, I spoke with an economist a couple of days ago, and I'm seeing the figures are just skyrocketing. In fact, they've now allowed Barbados, given the permission for Barbados to borrow some more money. I think it's $48 million again. So I am trying to understand, with what are we doing with that money? I know you might not have all the answers, but these are questions that, as a citizen, that's going over in my head. If we're borrowing all of this money, why can't we pay the people that we domestically that we owe? What's happening there?
Let me put it this way. I think that is a discussion which is substantive in itself. My concern, really and truly, as you said, is we are borrowing, and the interesting thing is that we are borrowing significant amounts of money in foreign exchange. That's what we're borrowing from foreign sources. Yes, we hear of concessionary interest rates from the IMF, etc. Some time ago, we would have heard in the beginning, I know a lot was, and the economist was my brother. I would have to channel him to be able to deal with this. But Wendell was the economist, not me. But I think I understand a little bit about things economic, nevertheless. Because when you look at our debt situation, a lot of the debt was domestic debt, money owed in Barbados dollars.
Right.
So in essence, in trying to settle domestic debt, it becomes less difficult because you are settling in Barbados dollars. Now, you have signaled, and it is over $1 billion borrowed in foreign currency, which means that we have to earn the foreign exchange. Even though you have moratorium, they will tell you that debt repayment doesn't start for X number of years down the road, etc. Whenever we pay, it will have to be settled in foreign currency. Yes, we had a default. I'm not going to get into the technicalities of those things, but all in all, when I look at the figures going up in terms of what government has borrowed and so on, what it says to me is, where is the parallel earning in foreign exchange that will put us in a position to service these debts? Because at the end of the day, we still have a level of debt to be serviced externally even before then. So it is worrisome that these numbers are large. And as you said, I am not sure where the money is going to in terms of particular projects, etc. And whether or not if you're borrowing to finance projects, whether or not we have the capacity to deliver on those projects, having committed to borrow money. That's getting into a little technical thing, but put it this way, I recall, and I as I said when I was doing this program, I wanted to avoid speaking as a former politician, as a former minister, cabinet member, but I in trying to look at this thing of debt, I remember when we came into office, there were a lot of funds committed from monies borrowed from the Inter-American Development Bank, and we had paid commitment fees, etc. But the capacity of the public service to deliver and execute those projects was not it didn't correspond with the timing of the loans, etc. So you were paying commitment fees and probably interest or whatever, but the project had not been executed in a way that allowed for the most efficient and effective utilization of those resources. You know,
Mm-hmm.
now a lot of the in terms of accessing debt as well, I don't know of the disbursement schedule because I can borrow $5,000 from you, but say to you, I want $5,000, but disperse it to me in 500 tranches every month. So I
Right.
don't, and that's why I say I prefer to analyze information and so on. But what the long and short is there's some questions to be asked, as you said, given what is the full amount of foreign money borrowed, and what are the debt repayment schedules,
Mm-hmm.
um, and how will it impact on our ability to service that and already existing debt within the context, because you talked about a COVID context, within the context of an environment that has been challenged like all the economies around the world,
Mm-hmm.
to maintain a level of income generation, not only for companies and households, but for government revenues in the case of government, income in the case of individuals, revenues for companies. So in essence, how is government able to, how will they do this
Mm-hmm.
as they project? Now, and the worry for me is that as we go from month to month, we recognize that this COVID-19 situation is not seeming to go anywhere. It's not going away because I mean, I listened to one of the U.S. Television stations last night, and they were talking about the incidence of this in New York City has just gone sky high again, and probably higher than it was this time last year. The UK now is having serious challenges, so it seems as though we're caught in some kind of vortex that we seem not to be able to get out of. And as that happens, we will find that decisions will be taken by those source markets, etc. So in essence, the long and short of the point that I'm making is that the ability to earn foreign exchange continues to be highly unpredictable. And
Yes.
therefore, it makes the situation even more difficult in terms of looking at the borrowings and how we utilize those resources, etc.
Mhm, mhm. Thank you so much. I just want to say to those who are watching, if you have any questions for Miss McLean or any comments, please go ahead and put it in the comment section. I will make sure that she has that. And I'm here going to read just a little bit from this article
Mhm.
from Dr. Ronnie Yearwood from Barbados Today. And he says, so let us take the whole picture. So his article is about what we are talking about, the Debt Restructuring Act. The government recently printed $125 million, posing as a bond issue. After walking the hills and valleys of this country, criticizing the last government for printing money during the last Great Depression following the 2008 financial crash. As the IMF will not let the government print money, the issuing of bonds is just a workaround. He's saying, is this what we taxpayers are paying all the prime minister's financial advisors to do? To find ways to take advantage of us? He says, in my last column, I said the prime minister does not seem to understand the basics of banking and loan and financial risk as carefully and clearly explained in another section of the regional press. This BAP government, interestingly, has transformed before our eyes to the party of borrow and spend. And he goes on to say, for the prime minister has embarked on a policy of populism by spending to try to ensure victory in the next election. This is what Mr. Yearwood is saying. This is his comment through Barbados Today. You can find the article in Barbados Today. But it then has a devastating effect. Oh, I'm sorry. However, the history has shown that it's a short-term approach used by leaders to stay in power, but it then has a devastating effect in the long term that can possibly end in a failed state. And these are the comments of Mr. Dr. Ronnie Yearwood in the article that entitled Major Concerns About the Debt Settlement Arrears Act. And this is in the Barbados Today newspaper. I just want to know what your comments are. If there's anybody who wants to comment on that, what I've just read in that article. And as I wait on people to send in their questions and their comments, I came across this this another article that was floating around on WhatsApp actually, and I want us to look at that now and to get your thoughts. I'm sure you've seen this going around, Miss McLean.
Right. Yes.
Right, and this is an article from actually 1991. From 1991, and this is are you familiar with this article?
Yes, I am. That article that takes you back to a period when Sir Lloyd Erskine Sandiford would have been Prime Minister, and we were going through an economic crisis as well at the time as a country. And I think in terms of there were some options to either go the way of the IMF or to seek solutions internally. And one of the ideas was that there would have been some kind of bond payment as part of a salary, I believe it would have been. Sir Henry Ford, who would have been part of the previous Barbados Day Party administrations from time to time, that would have been his comment about it. So in essence, he was saying at the time it was an unlawful act. My question to him now, because he's very much alive, and to the current government, of which it's his party in power, what makes it lawful? What made it unlawful then, and what makes it lawful now? No, I would have to go back and research it, but I would hazard a guess that the payment of bonds at the time would have been similar. You would have been given interest as well as they would have done now. And if you remember the discussion initially in relation to the current administration, what they were talking about would have been making it compulsory. In fact, if you go back to the GIS article back in, I think it was May last year that I referred to, they talked about a meeting turn and something else, and then they had to come back and recraft it and redesign it and represent it till eventually it came up with what it is now. So what it really says to me is that if you apply his reasoning, you have to ask the same question. Bond payments and unlawful act back in 1991. Are they, as instituted and implemented, an unlawful act in 2001? Interesting enough, it's 1991, 2001, 20 years ago, if my math is correct.
Yeah, that's 20 years. Yes, it looks like I was just here calculating it.
Yeah, 20 years ago,
Wow.
so.
Wow, let me just read a little piece of it. It says here, paying people in bonds is unconstitutional and against the Protection of Wages Act, the opposition leader Henry Ford said. Ford, a Queen's Counsel in private practice, said in 1951, the late Sir Grantley Adams, when he was Premier of Barbados, wrote the legislation into the statute books so that unscrupulous employers would have to pay all workers in the coin of the realm legal tender. And it says here, if the Prime Minister Sandiford says that public service workers have to be paid in bonds, tell him it is contrary to the laws of Barbados. Isn't that interesting? Ford advised public and private sector workers. He said bond payment was also contrary to the Constitution of Barbados. Ford continued, in Lancaster House in 1966, Tom Adams, Bernard St. John, Freddie Miller, and myself, along with Ernest Dighton Motley of the Barbados National Party, BNP, had a fight with the DLP to get fundamental rights provision put into the Constitution that would support and safeguard people's rights in this country. And so the question that we, the people, that we're asking is what's so different now? What is so different? Under the Constitution, he goes on to say, no man can compulsory interfere and deprive you of your property without adequate compensation. Money has always been considered to be property, right? And at that time, the leader of the Barbados Labour Party says, we will fight the DLP legally every step of the way. This is war. He said, this is a war. And it's interesting that he's saying this is a war. I mean, the truth is that we don't have a strong opposition, at this time. And so, it's the people that have to stand up and say, this is war, right? The people need to stand up and say, this is war. We're not going to take this. Yes. I'm seeing a comment here from Lee. She says, our children are the ones who will have to pay it back. It's very concerning. And I guess Lee's talking about the debt that we have, incurred, and at the same time not being able to pay our, pay our people domestically. It's really, this is very frightening, very frightening. And as you said, in this COVID-19 situation that we're in, where people are just having just a difficulty going to the grocery store, it's really very, very frightening. Yes. Ms. McLean, as we close, do you have any final comments that you want to make concerning this?
Well, I would say basically that at the end of the day, governments will have to borrow, but we also have to manage how we do this in a way that does not disadvantage citizens. I believe that the decisions to restructure the domestic debt in the way that it was done has created some significant challenges for the administration that did it. And in fact, I remember sharing this information about this legislation in a chat with Barbadians in the UK. And one man asked the question, perhaps was it the wise move to do what was done back then in terms of the restructuring? Because that also has implications in terms of person's sense of confidence in government paper, etc. In addition to that, my concern is that whenever initiatives like this, such initiatives are taken, there has to be careful attention made to the different impacts that it will have on different segments of the community and the society. And note what has happened. Credit unions have again exposed themselves because it's from the point of view of a financial decision. Well, they expose themselves in relation to the boss bonds by buying them. But my question is, when you put legislation in place like this, what are the implications for other kinds of decisions where people are seeking to invest in this country? So I worry. And on top of all of that, when we look at this in relation not only to domestic borrowing, but foreign borrowing, we have to ask ourselves, are we comfortable that government is demonstrating in all of its financial activities the kind of discipline that will endure us? I mean, and if I can end on this, it's a small matter, but it is something that jumped out at me because I have a way of looking and interpreting and connecting things as we look at bigger issues. I was driving behind a garbage truck very recently, having been the beneficiary of a beautiful, huge garbage bin and tray for disposal of. I was told by my neighbor that we will be told when to use it. I also discovered that some people were using it. But you know what? The very problem that it was intended to solve, because I think they said it would save the workers some back-breaking work. I watched the gentleman working on the trucks, bending deeply into these huge cavernous bins because they were brought in by somebody. I don't know whether they were brought in and then a solution was sought, or whether when they ordered the trucks with this intention. But from what I'm told, and I'm subject to correction if I'm wrong, they are now trying to retrofit vehicles to do the very thing. What it is to be, and how does this connect to all of this? We cannot afford to put money into projects that are at the whims and fancies of people, and which may cost the taxpayer at the end of the day. And so you have to be prudent all around, especially in a situation where government is stretched. We know that. Where the public is stretched, we know that as well. And therefore, at the domestic, corporate, and governmental levels, we have to be very prudent in the management of our financial affairs.
Wow. Thank you. That's a great note to end on. Ms. McLean, this was very informative. And just listening to you and researching it and just as you're talking, I'm making notes. I felt like I was in school. So thank you so much.
That may be the teacher in me.
and that is what we want to do with the show. We want to take it to the average person so that they understand. It's called We the People. And I want to thank everybody for logging on today. I see that Violet Beckles is saying the more money we get, the more we owe and the less we get. And that's where the whole thing of prudence comes in, right? Prudence, very important that we are prudent, especially with all of this that we're money that we are borrowing. As Lee is saying, it's the children that will have to pay it back. And so it is important that we ask them to be prudent. Educate yourself, people. Know exactly what is happening around you. So once again, thank you, Ms. McLean.
Thank you very much.
Yes, we appreciate you. Yes, guys, thank you for joining. And I want to say to everybody, I hope you learned something from this today. And I hope that as you are doing your Christmas decorations, your Christmas shopping, etc., we remember each other. Remember the nurses who will have to get their pay will be docked for striking. Remember them as you remember those who have lost loved ones in this period. I mean, all over, it's just loss and a lot of pain and a lot of struggle. And so we want to make sure that we keep people in mind. And I just want to say that us from the Marcia Week show that we are in solidarity with all of our nurses, that we are in full support of our nurses, those who have received the vaccination and those who are vaccine free, because we are so thankful to you all for all that you have done during this almost 2 years of this pandemic, how you have served the people of Barbados. And we think that it's very disappointing that you would have to take a pay cut because you're saying you don't want to take something in your body. So we are definitely in support of you, and we will be doing a show concerning what's happening with the nurses. So listen out for that. All right. So we'll see you again on Wednesday, next week at 1 p.m. We'll be coming to you live, 1 p.m. AST. Thank you so very much for watching. Enjoy the rest of your day, your cleaning, your shopping, and keep remembering. Let's remember others who might not have everything that we have, and to find a way to share. Find a way to share with others. This is a very, very important time. And say a prayer for those who have lost people in this time. Okay? God bless you all. Bye-bye.